everyone. My name is Laura Van Peenan, and I am a board member of BigTent USA. At BigTent, we are steadfast in our commitment to defending our democratic values, the Constitution, and the rule of law. Our goal is to empower you with facts, guidance, and calls to action so that you can become a stronger, more effective advocate for our country. Tonight, we are so thrilled to welcome Kerry Kennedy, Senator Chris Murphy, and the Bulwark's Sam Stein to BigTent. Kerry Kennedy is the president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, where she partners with courageous activists around the world to advance justice and human dignity. A human rights lawyer herself and the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Being Catholic Now and Speak Truth to Power, Kennedy has spent more than 4 decades championing causes from women's rights and criminal justice reform to freedom of expression and environmental justice. The 7th child of Ethel and Robert F. Kennedy, she has led hundreds of human rights delegations globally and appears frequently as a commentator and contributor in national media. Kerry has received numerous international honors for all of her advocacy. Senator Chris Murphy, the junior U.S. Senator from Connecticut, has dedicated his career to public service as an advocate for families. Senator Murphy has been a strong voice in the Senate fighting for job creation, affordable health care, education, sensible gun laws, and a forward-looking foreign policy. Senator Murphy is a consensus builder and many times throughout his political career has worked to bridge the political divide. Following the tragic shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012, Senator Murphy became one of the leading proponents of common sense reforms to reduce gun violence. He's championed a number of bipartisan bills aimed at expanding background checks and keeping guns out of the hands of criminals. Sam Stein is managing editor of The Bulwark. Prior to this role, he was deputy managing editor for politics at Politico, and he held similar posts at both the Daily Beast and HuffPost. Sam has also been a longtime contributor on MSNBC. Kerry, Senator Murphy, and Sam, thank you so much for coming to the BigTent. With that, Sam, I will turn the call over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura, and thank you to Kerry and Senator Murphy for doing this. I will note that I was looking at all the places that people are from, and the senator probably was looking at this too, scanning for Connecticut locations because I'm from there. Did see someone from Hamden, my hometown, so shout out to whoever that was. It scrolled by just way too fast to get the name. Tonight, we're going to be talking about ICE predominantly, but we're going to expand the conversation a little bit beyond that, because ICE, frankly, is omnipresent. It is a problem that is getting to the heart of the issue of the Trump administration, which is the trampling of rights, the trampling of human rights, the disregard of laws, and so on and so forth. I want to ask a question, the same question to both Kerry and Senator Murphy. I'm going to start with you first, Kerry, because as I think about this current state of affairs with respect to ICE, and with respect to detentions and deportations, I keep stumbling on an element that kind of stops me in my tracks a little bit, which is, yes, Donald Trump didn't explicitly state, I'm going to tear communities apart, I'm going to send people with masks into schools and churches, but he did promise and run on the largest deportation in U.S. history, and he did run on closing down the border, and he did pledge to empower ICE, and voters did elect him. And for me, it's very difficult to grapple with that sometimes. And I'm wondering how it is for you.
Thank you, Sam. And let me just start by saying that Chris Murphy has been such a hero on this issue and so many others in a very, very tough time. And at a time when so few are breaking through and getting on the news and sharing a different perspective. So I just really want to thank the senator for his courage in standing up and speaking out, and for being such a consensus builder over so many years. I'm your biggest fan, Senator, so I'm really happy to be here with you. You know, I think that people are scared. I think that they feel this extraordinary upheaval in our country right now. I think that a lot of people, particularly white men, feel like they were given a promise, that they made a deal with America, and the deal was if you stay out of trouble till you're 18 and you We will give you a job, and it will be backbreaking and mind-numbing and soul destroying. We're either going to put you in a factory and do this for the next 45 years, or we're going to shove you down a coal mine at 18 and we'll let you out at 65 and you'll die at 67 from black lung disease. But if you do that, we're going to give you certain things. We'll give you a job for the rest of your life. You'll be in a union, so you'll have health care. You'll make enough money that you can buy a home and you'll own that home and you can pass it on to your kids. We'll educate our kids so they'll do well, better than they do. You live in a community that's enriching culturally and education-wise and sports, et cetera, for your family. And you build the richest, most powerful country on earth, the United States of America. And they took that deal. And that's the deal their parents took, and it worked for their parents. And that's the deal that they were thinking was going to work for them. And then we broke the unions. The Republicans both broke the unions, and the jobs moved overseas. And their house went underwater in the housing crisis. And we didn't invest in the schools, so their kids are not going to have as good a job as they did. And they're not making $40 an hour in a union job anymore. They're making the same amount that the 13-year-old daughter makes down at the Walmart, $7.50 an hour. And they're scared. And it's terrifying. And at the same time, this is kind of a long answer, but sorry, but at the same time as there's this economic disruption, there's this social disruption. And the social disruption is personified by a Democrat who's got their finger in their nose saying girls are as good, women are as good as men, blacks are as good as whites, boys can marry boys, girls can marry girls. A 17-year-old boy can say he's a girl and go use your daughter's shower in the gym. Your 16-year-old daughter can go get an abortion and you have to pay for it out of your tax dollars, and she doesn't have to tell you about it. And, they're saying no. And that immigrant who used to mow your lawn is now your boss down at the Walmart, and you better be grateful to him for giving you a job. And they're saying no to all that. No, I don't like these changes. And it's scary, and they're angry. And so I think that when we come into this space, we have to understand where people are coming from. And we have to address those core issues. Obviously, the social justice issues we need to stand up for. But in terms of the economic issues, if we don't understand that, if we're not empathic to it, if we don't address it, we're lost. And so a lot of what the Trump administration has done and his speeches are about is blame. Blame the other, blame the immigrants, blame the women, blame the blacks, blame the Indians, blame whoever, the Mexicans, whatever. And I think people felt like our borders were out of control, that there were floods of people coming in, that there was no rhyme or reason to who got in and who didn't. And they wanted some understanding. They wanted some to stop that sort of craziness that they saw. And that's understandable to me. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does. Senator, is that how you see it too?
First of all, let me say thank you to BigTent. I think this is the second or third time I've been lucky enough to be invited to do something with you all, and really appreciate it. Kerry, just we'll repay the kind words to you. You've just been such a warrior for human rights and civil rights, and your voice has just been essential. So really wonderful to be here with you. And Sam is the right kind of Connecticut native, and a Red Sox fan. But he's a New York Giants fan, which is the right answer. Sam's great to be with you tonight.
Thanks.
Yeah. So listen, I think there's a lot right in Kerry's multicultural critique. I think so much of what America is going through right now can be explained through the prism of the destruction, the deconstruction of the white sort of male patriarchy that is crumbling underneath our feet. And I guess I would just add sort of two more predicates to sort of why we're here. The first is that in a nation that is multicultural, a nation that is defined by our differences, boy, it's hard to hold it together because we have these genetic predispositions to retreat to tribe, and so this has always been a challenge from the start. And I think it means that it's really important for the country to have a clear sense of how you become an American, of how you sort of become a member of this diverse community. And so the immigration laws of the United States matter when it becomes really confusing as to how you sort of get your ID card to be an American. I think it becomes harder to hold the whole project together. And so as it did appear as if the border was lawless, as people were right to look around and see, folks in their community who had been there for, 5, 10, 6, 7 years, and having still not gone through the process of figuring out whether they actually complied with the law as to who should be an American citizen. I think resentment grew, and it became a little bit sort of harder to sort of understand how we define ourselves. So I think that that's an important part of the story. And I think as Democrats, frankly, we didn't understand how important it actually is as a matter of selling to people the importance of the multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic project to have a set of rules at the border that we can all understand as to how you become an American and how you don't. But I think Kerry's also getting at something that is very real, which is that in a world of scarcity, scapegoating becomes a lot easier. And that's, I think, really what she's describing, is that we live in a America today where we have chosen scarcity. We have plenty of money and resources to go around, but as over the last 40 years, we have decided to concentrate wealth and power into the hands of a very small set of Americans. We have put everyone else in the mindset that they have to live their lives in a kind of inhumane way, climbing and scraping and punching their way to try to just get enough to survive. And so we've created this competitive mindset in America, not a communitarian mindset, a mindset in which you're constantly at war with your neighbors in order to make sure that you have just a big enough pile in order to take care of your family. And when you're in that scarcity mindset, that neighbor as competitor mindset, well, then the scapegoating is a lot easier, right, to sell as a demagogue, as a leader, because you're already in that place where you're not viewing those that you live with as collaborators. You're viewing them as folks who might get a little bit bigger pile in a zero-sum game. So I think that those are the sort of set of things that people were thinking about when they ended up voting for a candidate who did, as you mentioned, Sam, very transparently sell a vision of immigration and American identity reimagined.
Right. I don't want to overstate it to a degree, because I don't think it was explicit about some of the things that have happened. So, for instance, and this is a report from your organization, Kerry, there's $45 billion that is going to be spent on immigration detention in 2025. Let's talk about scarcity. That's a lot of money. 60,000 people a day are imprisoned in immigration detention centers. But more on my mind is what we don't know that's happening. So the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Group put out an incredible work documenting what's going on in Louisiana detention centers. And they called it, I think the report is literally titled "Inside the Black Hole." And what that means to me is that there's just a lot we don't know that's happening in these detention centers. And I guess to borrow a kind of infamous Donald Rumsfeld phrase, what are the known unknowns, Senator? I'll start with you. Like, what are you worried about that we're just not quite thinking about with respect to how these detention operations in these detention centers are being structured?
Well, yeah, as you know, there's been really limited access to
Right.
advocates, to members of Congress. In fact, today, the president made a really bold and worrying declaration. There is a rider in the appropriations bills that says you have to let members of Congress into these facilities. And what the president said today is, well, most of the money that I'm now using on these detention facilities doesn't come from the technical appropriations bill. It comes from the big, beautiful bill. Your riders don't apply to the big, beautiful bill. So I actually don't have to let any of you in anywhere because a sizable portion of the money that I'm using doesn't come with those riders attached. We have never, ever understood supplemental funding in a reconciliation bill to not have the appropriations riders attached to it, but you are now probably entering a moment where there's going to be even less visibility. So I certainly worry, Sam, every single day about what's happening in these detention centers. I think you are just seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of the brutal treatment that is being levied against immigrants, because only a handful of these videos get to us. But I also think that one of the pieces we're not talking about are the immigration courts, which are being destroyed and dismantled as we speak. He has fired every immigration judge that he can. He is replacing many of them with JAG officers who are just being given instructions to just rubber stamp the deportation orders. And very quietly, he and his radicals are rewriting the immigration code through precedent in these immigration courts that are now populated by people with no expertise, such that all of the ways historically that you've been able to mount a claim to stay in the United States, like, for instance, you were fleeing domestic abuse in your home country, are now being erased from our code and from our precedents. So, you know, at the end of this, we're going to have a lot of people who are going to have been subject to brutal treatment, and that will have trauma tales attached to it. But we also may have a brand new immigration code, especially in the review courts, that might take a decade to unwind.
Kerry, just on that end, I mean, obviously we've all watched this play out in real time, in shock, at just, I guess, the sheer amount of destruction to the courts, to communities, people. But I'm wondering, as you've watched it and as you've worked on this issue, is there anything that's surprised you about the sort of, I don't know, the elements of it, the how fast and rapid it's been undertaken, or just the sheer size and scope of it?
You know, I think we've seen a lot of videos of violence of ICE on the streets, but what we haven't seen a lot of is what actually happens once somebody is detained. To the senator's point, I was actually scheduled to go on Monday to look at ICE facilities with members of the RFK team and visit our clients, but we've been denied access, blaming it on the government shutdown. This is just one more example of how they're using this in order to deny access. But I visited a handful of ICE facilities across rural Louisiana just a few weeks ago, and I had a chance to talk to Laura about it, which is why I'm speaking with you today. And the brutality I witnessed was really quite shocking.
Speak a little bit about that.
Sure. So one of our clients was a victim of sex trafficking, was trafficked to the United States from Honduras when she was 14, and then raped again and again and again, many times a day for several years. She managed to escape. And she pulled her life together, and then she started a nonprofit organization to rehabilitate victims of trafficking. I mean, really an extraordinary woman. A few months ago, 6 months ago, she was told by her doctor that she likely has colon cancer and that she needed to get an X-ray to look at that. A couple of days later, she was picked up by ICE. She's been in that facility for 6 months, and they
Ugh.
haven't let her go see a doctor. They haven't given her the X-ray. So think about the mentality of that. Just one case, but so heartbreaking. And I said to her, how do you survive? What keeps you going? And she said, you know, I was terrified going before a judge about what questions they were going to ask me, because my whole life depends on my answers. Am I going to get political asylum or not? And she said that afterwards, her lawyers, which are my colleagues at ARC, Human Rights, sent her the transcript of her hearing. So she's now using that transcript to help other women in this facility who are going before a judge prepare for their hearings. I mean, just think of the humanity of this woman with nothing on this earth. And she finds a way to serve. And that's the type of person we're locking up. We have 27 cases against the Trump administration right at the moment. Almost all of them are about abuses to people in immigration facilities. We have a dozen cases of women who are sexually assaulted and raped, and transgender people sexually assaulted and raped. We have over a dozen cases of people from Cameroon who applied for political asylum. Their asylum claims were denied. They were held in these facilities in Louisiana. They were sent back to Cameroon, and then ICE sent their political asylum applications to the government of Cameroon. I mean, this is so clearly illegal and so clearly a violation and inconsistent with what the United States stands for. And that's why we need to shut down these for-profit facilities. I'll just tell you one other story about Louisiana. We were there, I was there in the summer, and I would say it was in the, the 90s. It was hot. We went into a facility, they had 100 people in cots that have 3 people per cot. The ceiling was right next to the roof, okay? So, and it was a tin roof, so it's basically an oven.
Right.
No air conditioning. So I go over to the fellow there from ICE, and I said, when are you going to get the air conditioning fixed? Oh, yeah, we called about it. We're waiting. The guy's supposed to get here next week. I mean, next week? Are you kidding? So I said, but you have all this money from the big, beautiful bill. He said, yes, it passed, but it hasn't come to the facility yet. And yet, on the very day that bill passed, the executives from Geo Group and Core Civic, which control 90% of these for-profit facilities, gave themselves raises. So they didn't wait to give themselves a raise, but they're sure waiting to give relief to the women, to the people in the facilities.
These are devastating stories. It actually raises an interesting question, Senator, because obviously the politics of immigration are cyclical, right? I mean, it was not, it was during the first Trump administration where the backlash to family separation led to a lot of people in your party calling for the abolition of ICE. Even prior to Trump's first election, it was the reaction to the Syrian civil war and the refugee crisis that led a lot of governments to, adopt more open policies towards admitting refugees, backlashes to backlashes to backlashes to backlashes. How does it affect how you view immigration politics, if at all? And, obviously abolish ICE was a politically I want to say problematic, potentially toxic slogan for Democrats in the last election. And yet here we are listening to incredible tales of abuses by ICE. What do you do with an agency like that should you ever regain power?
I do think we have to sort of understand that we probably live in a new normal, given how global trafficking works today. This is probably not as cyclical as it once was, because traffickers have figured out that they have a market anywhere in the world. So it is, now not just a phenomenon of people coming to the southwest border from Mexico and Central and South America. People are coming from huge numbers coming from India and China and Bangladesh, and I think that market will remain. Trump talks a lot in a language of control, and I think I think the Democratic Party generally has done a really terrible job of sort of understanding where the nation is spiritually and metaphysically, and people feel, we're talking about where the country is culturally. People feel out of control of their lives. But more than that, they feel like the government isn't even in control of the forces that dictate their lives. The government can't control the outflow of jobs from the United States. The government can't even control who enters the country. And so Trump talks a language of control. That's what tariffs are about. A very unpopular policy in and of themselves. But what he's talking about is taking control of our economic borders. His immigration policy, as it turns out, is not super popular either. But again, he's talking about control. He's talking about controlling who comes and who doesn't come to the United States. And so I think as a movement, as a party, we have to understand that if you are not talking to people about how you are going to give them more control and how the government is going to get control of these sort of big forces that seem to overwhelm the United States, then you're ultimately not winning. I spent, as you know, Sam, probably 6 months of my life that I will never get back, sitting in a room with Kirsten Sinema and James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, trying to come up with a new way to manage the border. And I wanted to do that because I don't think the solution is to get rid of ICE. I think the solution is to decrease their importance, because you create a border where you resolve cases at the border, or maybe even before people come to the border. So you don't have people coming into the United States with them not knowing and their neighbors not knowing whether they are going to be a citizen or not. And so that was the bill that we wrote. We wrote a bill that said, okay, we're gonna dramatically increase resources into the immigration system, but not ICE officers. We're going to increase judges and asylum hearing officers and border patrol agents, so that we manage everybody at the border, and we'll turn a lot of people around, way more than we turn around today. But when somebody enters, they'll actually know that they're on a sort of fast path to become an American citizen. But I did that also. I was in that room also because I thought I sort of just politically had to sort of drag the Democratic Party a little bit more to the center on this whole conversation, because we had become a party that was sort of identified as defending a system that couldn't be defended, that was badly, badly broken. And so we needed to say, no, we're going to get tough on the border. Tough on the border is not what he's doing. I would argue it's not even what Biden was doing at the end. It's coming up with a new way of judging cases right there. I think that would give people a lot more confidence in the system writ large if we decided the cases in a matter of days or weeks, instead of what's been happening for the last decade that Democrats have been defending, which is a decade or more before somebody finds out whether they're an American citizen or not.
I'm going to switch to some audience questions to make sure that we get some good participation from there. I'm going to start with James Resser, who chimed in, and why don't we give this one to Kerry? James asked, do either of you think the reason for our current situation is the massive amount of money spent on campaigns by the ultra-wealthy? And Kerry, I go to you because you referenced private prisons in your last answer, and I do have a feeling that that does play a role where people are profiting from this detention regime that's being put in place.
Well, yeah, so the GEO Group spent $2 million on the Trump campaign and got $400 million back with the big, beautiful bill. So, and probably more. So, yes, I think that does play a role. I think the stock market plays a very, very large role, and people's use of their retirement accounts plays a large role.
Senator, this is more a question on the legal realm, but I'm curious what your understanding is of this. It's from Nancy McMillan. She asks, can you explain the overlap and disconnection between what ICE can do in a state despite state protocols and laws? I guess that's coming to a head in Illinois, obviously, where the governor and the administration are in a standoff right now over the deployment of the National Guard. But really, it's fundamentally an issue of immigration enforcement, as I see it. So, curious how you read the situation.
So yeah, I am not an immigration lawyer, but ICE does
you just play one on the Senate floor.
Yeah,
I
right.
Yeah.
I won't make anything up, but I do know enough to know that ICE does have jurisdiction to operate inside states, and so they have an independent mandate to enforce immigration laws, and that mandate exists. In some way, shape, or form, regardless of state laws, there's limitations to what any state can do to restrict ICE's national mandate. National immigration laws generally supersede any contraction of those laws that state laws would impose. But it is pretty clear the conditions upon which the U.S. military can be dispensed to support ICE actions inside American states and American cities. And those limitations are essentially only in cases necessary to suppress rebellion. And there is absolutely no cause for the deployment of the military for that narrow purpose. And the US Code does not allow for the National Guard or other elements of the military to be sent in to simply assist immigration officers in the pursuit of their duties. I've been disappointed by some of the decisions that have come out, and I'm not optimistic that if these cases reach the Supreme Court that they'll rule in the right way. But to my mind, there's clearly not a justification for the usage of the military in just sort of a generic support role to ICE inside US states or cities.
I'm going to read a comment from Kitty, who says, Sam is terrific. Oh, sorry, Kitty.
Respond to that. Sam, respond. Take as long as you want to respond to that.
That wasn't a question. It was just a comment. I will second, and not a question in that vein. I would encourage everyone to read Kerry's column in Newsweek about this, which is your financial portfolio might be funding immigration prisons. Really important column written there. Kerry, question for you. It's come from several people, so I'm not going to name the names, but a lot of interest in why ICE is masking and whether there is anything that can be done to unmask these agents simply as a matter of transparency so people know who is arresting them.
Yeah, so to answer that, that is a decision by the federal government. And that's why we need to change who's making decisions at the federal level. And, that is done in a number of ways. Vote, organize, protest, use whatever you can, whatever is at your disposal to make your opinions known that this is not okay. But I want to come back to something that you mentioned at the beginning of this question, which was the Newsweek article. There's something else that people can do, which is not about the government, in order to address the immigration issue. And that's because the two largest companies, private companies, they're public companies that are imprisoning people, detaining them in immigration, are publicly traded. So they're Geo Group and Core Civic. Now, if you have a retirement account, you may well be invested in the Geo Group. So for many of us, the default option in our retirement accounts is called a target date fund. And you can go to your company or your retirement planner and say, am I vested in core civic or geo group? And I would like you to divest me from those two companies. And that should happen. And if enough of us do that, they're going to be shut down.
It's an interesting point you raised about civic action in a time where political action is hard to attain. And this actually gets to a couple questions that are posed to the senator. One from Sonny Steinmetz, who said, how do we stop this? And don't say elections, because he, being Trump, will stop free and fair elections from taking place. It's a cynical view, but I don't think it's necessarily without merit. And then Pat Thorne, more recently in the chat, said, do citizens need to come to congressional hearings en masse with our darn signs? Enough talking, more action. We are willing. I guess this gets to a larger point, Senator, which is like, what is the most effective form of opposition politics right now? We saw, obviously, the No Kings protest, 7 million people strong. Does that have a material impact, do you think?
Of course it does. Of course it does. And listen, I understand people's worry and skepticism about whether there's going to be another free and fair election, but there will be only if we mobilize in big enough numbers. A political scientist or historian out of Harvard University did a sort of survey over the last 100 years of democracies that were in peril, and what's the common story about those that fell and those that were saved. And the only common denominator was mass mobilization. In places where there was fairly immediate mass mobilization, the democracies held up. In places where the regime was successful in convincing the public to stay behind closed doors, it fell. And the study actually put a number on it: 3% of the overall population.
I thought it was
now,
3.5%, just to be clear.
3.5% Sam. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. I want people to understand how much mobilization they need. Okay.
Appreciate that. So what we had set, we had 7 million people out there last weekend. That's close. It's not 3.5%, but it's close. And it's not a shock why this works. You even see it working in the last 48 hours. So as much as Republicans tried to bully people into staying home, saying that these were hate rallies and that anybody who showed up at the rally were terrorists, the numbers were off the charts. The biggest day of public national mobilization in the history of the country. And lo and behold, on Monday, Tuesday afternoon, an article shows up in one of these DC political papers that suggests Republicans are starting to write some plans to turn back on the Affordable Care Act subsidies. This is what Democrats have been demanding happen in order to get our votes for the budget. And for 3 weeks, they had just said, we're not talking to you. We're not going to even entertain this idea of keeping premiums where they are. And now they are apparently midwifing a few proposals. That's a direct result of the amount of mass mobilization is happening and the worry that they have that the elections will come off next November. And if these premiums go up and people know about it, that they're going to lose their seats. So this is still the most effective way to organize, and any action matters. So posting online matters, calling your congressperson matters, but it is in-person action that matters the most. So showing up to your congressman's office or an event that they're holding, coming to these rallies, that is still the most effective way to move the needle.
Senator, just quickly, because you mentioned it and it's come up a couple of times, is this government shutdown obviously has stretched on fairly far. The resolution does not appear to be particularly close, although maybe you have some insight that you can share with us about how you think it ends and when it ends.
Yeah, well, listen, this is important. I mean, I've never seen a moment like this. I've been here for 20 years. I've been through a bunch of government shutdowns. I've never, ever seen the majority party boycott negotiations, refuse to negotiate with the minority party. What Republicans are basically saying is that if you aren't willing to vote for our immoral, corrupt budget, we aren't going to open the government. We didn't have a shutdown when Joe Biden was president and Democrats were running the Senate. Why? Because we negotiated with Republicans, as every majority party has always, when it comes to how we fund the federal government. And there are two issues. One is this looming catastrophe in our healthcare system, but the second is that without any controls in this budget on how the president spends money, right now, Democrats are being asked to essentially fund the destruction of our democracy, and more specifically, fund the witch hunt operation against us. So, to me, this is just a moment to draw a moral line in the sand and to say, yeah, you have to negotiate with us if you want our votes. But also, there has got to be some contraction of the corruption and lawlessness, or we essentially would be signing our own death warrant by voting for a budget that pays for the wholesale imprisonment, harassment, and intimidation of Democrats who speak up against Trump. So yeah, does that sound like this is stopping anytime soon?
No,
Okay, that didn't sound like a super optimistic assessment of the situation. But again, I will say that Republicans are starting, at least on the healthcare front, to suggest that they're ready to talk and sit down. And so the more public mobilization we have, I think the shorter the shutdown will be.
Kerry, I apologize. You were about to speak and I cut you off. So I wanted to make sure that
I was just going to say that, the No Kings rally in June got 5 million people. In October, it was 7 million. So we're going in the right direction. And then I would just say from my own family's history, my 6 generations ago, people came impoverished on coffin ships from Ireland, and they landed in Boston, and they stayed there for generations under an extremely oppressive rule. And they came to understand that the way to create change, to make sure that they got access to healthcare, to make sure that their children were educated, to make sure that their housing was decent, was through politics, through organizing. And that's what they did. On the Kennedy side and on the Fitzgerald side, they became community organizers. And they organized their wards, and then they organized their towns and their cities. That is it. It's very simple stuff. You just go and you organize it. And that's what we need to do right now.
Kerry, I had a question for you, not an audience question, a Sam question. You spent obviously a fair amount of time among people and within institutions that have funding from the government or advocate before the government or just plain old interact with the government. I guess a lot of folks, including me, were pretty stunned by how quickly many of these institutions, from law and academia to media, and many of these powerful individuals with tons of independent wealth capitulated to Donald Trump's pressure fairly early on in the administration. I think that when we look back, that's going to be a real inflection point for what happened with this presidency. But as someone who's in these worlds and among these institutions and whose work to a degree revolves around that, how has it impacted your work, and how do you feel about that capitulation?
Well, who did not capitulate? You know who did not capitulate? The biggest group that didn't were the civil rights organizations. Right. They stood completely together from day one. Why is that? We're all competing for the same foundation dollars and the same private dollars, but we work together. And we've always worked together as a team because of the history of civil rights in this country and around the world. The basic understanding that if you would want to advance dignity, you need to work together. You need to work in community. So that group of organizations stood firm. Who else stood firm? The progressive foundations stood absolutely firm together. And so when Trump went after the Ford Foundation and went after the OSI, he got nowhere because they stood firm together. And that makes a huge difference. Who did not stand together? The law firms. My gosh, these are the people who people spend millions of dollars because they're the toughest, strongest defenders in the world, and they just folded and folded and folded. Why? Because they never called each other. They never said, let's come together. We need to resist together. And then you saw that with the universities. They start to fall quickly. And then Harvard said no. But Harvard did not do that alone. Harvard went and got a coalition and started building coalition. And that's when that resistance started to work. So, I mean, to me, the lesson is clear. The only way to create real change is in coalition with one another. I mean, that's what Senator Murphy has said in different ways again and again and again. We all have to come out. We all have to talk to one another. We all have to be on the same page. We have to create change, not disparately, but together.
No, it's a great point about collective action as an antidote to what we're experiencing now. And it's true on the politics realm too, right? I mean, you're starting to see states make collectives around, for instance, CDC type policies where they're going to have vaccine policies that they share because they don't trust the CDC. Senator, I'm curious if you can expand on that. There have been some instances where collective action and a refusal to capitulate has actually had a material effect. I mean, in the comment section, multiple people have mentioned Jimmy Kimmel. And I think that's true, where a bunch of people said collectively, we're going to cancel our Disney subscriptions if ABC follows forward with this. In fact, they did cancel their subscriptions and ABC went back and put them on the air. What have you seen in the past 8-9 months around the idea of collection active action that gives you hope? What have you seen around the absence of collective action that makes you, mournful, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the highest profile example, but you also have the example of what California is doing today, where they recognize the threat to democracy is posed by changing congressional district rules in the middle of a 10-year cycle, and they are pursuing a maximalist approach to try to remedy that. I wish other Democratic states who are in a position to add seats would do the same. I think one of the real risks at a moment like this is that the regime, the party that is trying to convert a nation from democracy to autocracy, is breaking all of the rules and all of the norms, and the party that is in opposition still feels pressure to observe the norms. We don't have that luxury right now, so we have got to be willing to take risks and to do things that don't feel fantastic. Saying we are not going to reopen the government until you present us a moral budget. It doesn't feel great because there's pain, there's hurt along the way, but it's important for us to show that this is not a normal moment. I was one of the people who said none of us should have showed up to the State of the Union speech, right, to legitimize his corruption. That people didn't want to do that because they felt like that was rude or impolitic or too unprecedented. A lot of folks worry that tactics like that create a downward spiral. They're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to do everything possible to try to destroy our democracy. It's not going to be our rudeness or impoliteness that is going to cause them to act more destructively. I will say, one more thing on this broad topic, especially of the elites folding. Monopoly and totalitarianism go hand in hand. When you have deeply concentrated power, it makes the job of corruption that much easier for the regime. You've seen that in the media space. We were already a highly consolidated media environment, and so you just don't need to turn the knobs much more to make sure that only your friends have control of all of, at the very least, the mainstream media outlets. You see that with the Ellison family, very close to Trump, taking control of Paramount and desiring now to take control of CNN, amongst other properties. So as a party, as we try to sort of take the long view of how to ultimately build a society, a culture, and economy that has more prophylactics against autocracy, the deconcentration of consolidated economic power, especially in the media space, will be a big part of that project. And by the way, it's just really popular. People actually don't like the fact that So much of the news is homogenized, and so few people control information in this country. So it's both a worthwhile project, but also a pretty politically popular project.
Thank you. You made a sterling endorsement for subscribing to independent
For
journalism,
the
like
for the
the
bulwark.
bulwark.
Yes. Sign up.
Quickly, I want to give a quick shout out to Julie Nelson in the chat. Julie says she's on furlough right now, but she's still fighting. And to all those who are on furlough right now, in the chat and watching this, thank you for enduring what you're enduring. We genuinely appreciate the role that our federal workers are playing in this moment. We have only, God, 4 minutes left, not even 2. It went by fast. I want to give each of you a chance to deliver some closing remarks. And Kerry, let's start with you.
I've been working on human rights for 45 years. When I started working, all of Latin America was under right-wing military dictatorships, and today there's not one left standing. And all of Eastern Europe was under communism, and South Africa was at the height of apartheid. And women's rights was not on the international agenda. And all of those seemed like impossible things to overcome. But they were overcome, and they were overcome not because governments wanted them to. Governments tried to stop them, and huge militaries tried to stop them. And yes, the CEOs of some of the largest corporations on earth, these huge multinational corporations, tried to stop them. But the changes happened because small groups of determined people, as Margaret Mead said, harnessed the dream of freedom and made it come true. That's the answer. That's what we all need to do. We know it. It's in our hearts. Everybody on this call knows it. That's why you're on this call. And that's what we're going to do to bring back our country and to create a more just and peaceful world.
That's an incredible perspective. Thank you so much for that. Chris, sorry,
I don't think
Senator Murphy.
I don't think I can do better than that. That's
I don't think you can either. I'm sorry, man. I should have gone in
Thanks
reverse order
for your
there.
vote. Thanks for your vote of confidence, Sam. Yeah, I mean, let me just take it, back to the subject of this conversation. Yes, it is true that people voted for Donald Trump knowing exactly what he was promising. But it is also true that they thought he was sincere. Many of them thought he was sincere when he said he was going to go after the criminals. And it is a statement about who we probably really are as a nation, that his immigration policy today is deeply unpopular. In fact, it's one of the most unpopular aspects of his entire first 9 months, because when faced with the reality of what's happening, when faced with their neighbors, their peaceful neighbors being rounded up brutally, with violence becoming normalized, people reacted. And so, I think that we can all question the nature of our country, right? Who our neighbors really are, when Donald Trump wins for a second time after he endorsed an insurrection, after he was convicted of multiple crimes. But everybody gets a second shot. And now, having seen who he is, I think the country is making another judgment, which is that, yeah, we want a more secure border, but we do not want migrants to this nation treated like animals. We do not want to abandon this core principle of Americanism, that we rescue people from terror and torture, and we are stronger because of our differences. So in his overreach, there is an opportunity for us to kind of reset a calming humanity in this country, about how we deal with a multicultural society, and hopefully an opportunity for the Democratic Party to realize that if we convince folks that we're serious about reforming the immigration system rather than just defending a broken system, we can sort of build on this consensus that is actually forming in the country about how badly Trump has botched this. So yeah, I wake up every day with that anxiety and anger that everybody else does, but with an eternal sense of optimism that we're going to survive this moment and maybe come out stronger on the other end.
Your lips to God's ears.
But
all right, Laura.
Yes.
Turning it back to you.
But really appreciate everybody coming out tonight and hearing this important conversation. I guess I wanted to close, and I didn't plan this with Kerry, but I saw on the RFK Human Rights website a quote that I feel is germane to the current moment, even though it's from 1968, her father, which is, and it really speaks to the ethos of the Big Tent. We really are nonpartisan. We are really trying to bring people together. So hope my voice won't crack. Anyway, what he said in 1968, along with so many other things that we all remember, what we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice towards those who still suffer within our country. It's April 1968, over 50 years ago, and here we are today. But as Kerry says, we just all need to keep pressing forward, and we got to remember why we're doing this work, and we will get there. So thank you again for everyone coming out, and keep watching for our future events and for the recap and recording from tonight. Feel free to share that out to others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.